Yes, okay. The big one. Used to be all darkness and blackness, and now it's all light. Right, you can start. Okay. No? Yeah. Yeah, green. Okay. Welcome to the second meeting of the Neighbourhood Plan Advisory Committee. We're looking at updating our made neighbourhood plan. The last meeting we introduced ourselves and thanked people like Jerry, who've given so much to our group, who were standing down, and we welcomed new people as well as familiar faces. Emma, you didn't come to the last meeting, so we welcome you. Emma is a business owner in the town, so perhaps is particularly interested in our town centre policies. So the point of this meeting is to go through our existing plan and look at it in context with the new NPPF and the emerging Pendle local plan, and look at where we've been successful. We've had policies that have been successfully applied to Colne planning applications. However, there is one section I would like to take in camera. So I would like that to be a private item, and that's when we review the section to do with policy CNDP6, future housing growth. So when we get to, we'll skip over that, and when we get to the end of the meeting, apart from that, then you've got some form of words, haven't you, to use, and we've got to have a vote on it. So that's the welcome over. Do we have any apologies?
We do. We've got apologies from Councillor Thomas, Councillor Wildman, and Alexander Denton.
Okay. And does anybody have any declarations of interest? No. Which actually spurs us on. Okay. So minutes of the last meeting, they were quite lengthy. They've been circulated. Do I have anybody to propose to accept them? Ian? And second them, David. All those in favour? Excellent. Okay, so public forum, nobody here from the public. And so moving on to item 6, which is the Colne Neighbourhood Development Plan Review, and noting the 3 bullet points. So I hand over at this point of the meeting, missing out the CNDP 6, but looking at the other policies, to Michael Weller.
Thank you. I'll probably sound a bit like a stuck record at this point. In my strong advice in terms of the local plan is that has its own preparation process, and that will reach, almost the sort of crunch stage at the examination in, I think I'm right saying in May.
They've now revised that to June or July.
Right. So that sometime this summer, the crunch time will be the examination. so that all those who have made responses, whether they be objections or supporting representations, in terms of that new Pendle local plan, will have the opportunity to make their case as to why the policies should go forward as they were consulted upon, or whether they should be changed. And that's a separate process, and I cannot underline that enough, that if you are worried about the content of the Pendle local plan, the place to be is round the table of that independent examination. The format it will take will be very similar to, if you think back to the examination on the neighbourhood plan itself, probably a bit more formal than that, but nevertheless, it will be a round table discussion on various matters. So no doubt housing, no doubt open space, transport, but that is all to be decided by the independent examiner, the planning inspector. They will decide which matters they're going to ask questions on, and then it will be held in a room similar to this, be a round table discussion, and they will turn to each respondent in turn, saying, so, you know, in terms of matter one, I won't pick housing, I'll pick something else. Matter one, economy. Why are you, Mr. Landowner, upset about what Pendle Council have produced? They'll be allowed to present their case. Pendle Council will present their case, and then others can contribute as well. There's nothing decided on the day. All that will be decided in terms of what that inspector recommends in terms of changes to the Pendle local plan. Yeah? So
Wait a second. It just, Gina's not used to wearing so many hats. She realised that.
So if you're concerned about the content of the Pendle local plan, talking about the neighbourhood plan is not the place. The place to discuss that is through the local plan process. Yeah, so I can't be clear on that.
So what I would just like to ensure is that we're not in conflict with the emerging Pendle local plan. Here it is. As it currently stands, there's none of our policies that in some way conflict with any of these policies.
I think that's a reasonable summation in terms of the emerging local plan and your existing neighbourhood plan. What we will have to do in time, as the Pendle local plan is adopted, is look in detail at the neighbourhood plan policies, and then that may well trigger revisions to your neighbourhood plan policies. Yeah, because the danger is if you don't do that, it may be Pendle may say, others may say, well, your neighbourhood plan is not strictly in line with the new local plan, therefore your policy is superseded.
Okay, so we've got a further complexity, of course, which is we've got the examination in the Wilson Room in June or July. I've written to the programme manager of the inspector and said, can we, the Colne Town Council, have a seat at the table? They've written back to me and said, we have made the representations as an organisation at the final level of Reg 19, and it's up to the examiner, but the inspector, but we'll probably be sent questions. So we have that with our neighbourhood plan. We'll be sent questions and then probably be invited. So normally you'd think, oh, well, okay, so it's a clear policy. That will be released perhaps in December. That's what they're thinking. So that was when the plan will be adopted. But David is the chairman of Colne Area Committee, and he has been briefed that in fact Pendle is now starting its new plan, which they're hoping to have an examination this time next year. So this new plan that's coming to examination, will only be a 3-month plan. It's not going to go to 2040 because of the new MPPA. So in essence, we've got a 2-part process. If we review our neighbourhood plan in December, in light of the made Pendle plan, we'll have already presumably had sight of the emerging Pendle local plan, which supersedes it.
I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to say at this point. The government, as with the previous government, are committed to speeding up the development plan system. Whether they envisaged a situation as Sarah's just described, I'm not quite sure. I think if that is Pendle's position, and by the examination in June, I think the examiner may have serious questions as to say, well, do you wish me to proceed? Because
that's a fair question.
Yeah, if I was the inspector, I think that would be my first question: is do you wish me to proceed? Is there any point in me spending the next 6 months deliberating this, putting everybody to the trouble, producing a report, only for you to tell me that you're going to prepare a new plan? It is not unknown for situations where things like that occur, for inspectors to say, well, that's it, we'll just call it a day. Or to turn around to the council and say, well, all well and good, but you have reached this stage. What amendments would you have to make to the existing document to make it sound and to avoid the need for a further process and examination? So yeah, I can't really say much more than that.
You see,
it's a very
it's a horrible situation, but essentially the evidence base of the Pendle plan is a very green plan. It's there's a lot on ecology and green matters, and an explanation why any housing should be on the sustainable sites, brownfield sites within the settlement boundary, etc., etc. Now, there's no way that you can move from 148 and this very green plan with this green evidence base to we're going to build on large tracts of the countryside and keep the evidence base of the old plan. It's not a matter of just changing the number, because the raison d'etre, all the underpinnings of it are moving in one way, and in fact now we'll have to pivot to a build scenario, which the old evidence base that's in here doesn't support. I mean, even the Hedna doesn't support this level of building, does it? Even the previous Hedna didn't support it. Yeah.
I think in terms of this group this evening, I think you've just got to park that.
Okay.
As I said in opening, the local plan has its own preparation process. Yeah. My working assumption is that we'll proceed as normal. If you want to be involved in that, you need to be at the table when each of the matters that or you're interested in so you can, you know, put your views across on those matters. Whether there is this wider context of what the actual future of that plan is, I think that's a matter for others to consider.
Okay.
I just don't think we can make any headway on that. And the only thing I would say is that in terms of the existing neighbourhood plan and the emerging plan as published, there are no, from what I can see, great
Okay.
inconsistencies.
All right. So we can't do what we can't see and we can't know, essentially. So what we just need to do there is item 6, first bullet point. We've discussed it, unless anybody's got any questions. We've discussed it. All we can do really is be bystanders. We've made our consultation at Reg 19 of the Pendle local plan from our perspective as a neighbourhood planning group. That's submitted. There it is. The inspector's got that document. So we just park that first bullet point. Bill?
Who's making the call at Pendle to rewrite the plan? Surely
Angela Rayner.
Sorry,
Angela Rayner's making it.
Rainbow.
Yeah.
So there's not a case where they could put the draft plan into place and then do amendments. You've got to go and start it all over again.
There's no way that you could make one thing into another. It would be like trying to dress Paul and David up as a pantomime horse. It would be very difficult for them to look convincing in that outfit. You can't change the Pendle local plan to fit in with Angela Rayner's plan. Exactly. Exactly. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. This sounds like a right dance macabre. So if I get this straight, we currently have a local plan based on the current local, on the National Planning Policy Frameworks.
No, it isn't.
No. I mean, up to the current government, on the last government.
Yes, the last government.
The last government. And because we've had a change of government, we're still continuing with the process of the local plan. But once it's been put in place, because the new government have changed the policy planning framework, we've got to have a new local plan.
Yes.
Which will then supersede this one.
Yes.
But then if this government then gets taken out and the new government puts into effect the old planning policy frameworks, we'd have to then go through the same process. And in the meantime, our neighbourhood development plan has got to be able to fit in to a lot of non-existent plans, as well as existent plans, which are also non-existent.
So essentially,
wow.
Yeah, we haven't got a crystal ball, which is exactly what Michael's been saying. We haven't got a crystal ball. So the process that we're in here is I have spent some time looking at small tweaks and things that we can do to our plan. And I think we should, and this is the rest of the meeting really, be working in the background to move so that that work, all the things that we do know and we can control, that work is done. So that all the things that we can't control and we don't know, which is an awful lot, we're at least in a position then, when we do know them, to move forward, secure in the knowledge that the things we can do have been done so we can be faster and more efficient. And when we need our plan to be made, it's not like, oh, now the clock starts and we've got another 6 years. The idea is we'll be very agile because we'll have identified things and move those on, and then we'll have new things to do in the light of the new Pendle local plan.
Yeah, having sort of followed that piece of the discussion, but perhaps I painted too bleak a picture. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary for the inspector to say, well and good, I've heard what you've said, I'm happy to proceed, but you, Pendle, must commit to an early review of certain parts of the plan.
Yes.
So it doesn't, you know, it may be one policy. And deep down, there's probably not a plan in the country that wouldn't have to commit to that in terms of what their commitments have to be in terms of keeping their plans up to date. So we're perhaps not in that unusual territory that I was sort of outlining. As I say, the key place to be is the local plan examination.
Okay.
And, you know, at the end of the day, whether it's an existing plan, an emerging plan, the law in terms of your neighbourhood plan is that it is assessed when it moves through its preparation process. It's assessed against the adopted strategic policies, not the emerging policies, the adopted policies. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, first bullet point, unless anybody's got any questions, dealt with. We can't do anything. We're just parking that. We're aware of it. You don't believe there are any horrific conflicts as the document that we now see, which is this one. You don't believe there's any horrific conflicts. So, second bullet point, looking at our plan against the newly amended National Planning Policy Framework.
I think the answer's the same. This is one thing I have had the time to do and look at each of your existing policies against the National Planning Policy Framework, and most of them wouldn't generate a change. Yeah.
So are we going to go through all the four?
Well, I haven't got that with me. I think it's something
Okay.
I can send out after the meeting.
Okay.
But my view is that there's no fundamental changes needed as a result of changes to national planning policy. The changes to national planning policy were all about one issue, weren't they? Which was housing. And because your neighbourhood plan cannot say anything strategically about housing,
No.
that's the local plan, the national policy changes don't really impact on your neighbourhood plan, other than at some point, you know, down the line in terms of the review of your neighbourhood plan, you have to show that it's consistent with national policy and in conformity with the strategic planning policies for the area. But in detail, there's nothing in NPPF that would suggest policy you've got to delete policies or make major overhauls.
Okay. So on that basis, I would like to go through them in order, missing out number 6. And if we could look at our mission statement, which of course you've got to remember was done the better part of a decade ago. So you see it on page 10 of our plan, and it says, to further develop Colne as an attractive and thriving town that promotes and protects its natural and built heritage and provides a good quality of life with improved connectivity, facilities and services for residents and visitors alike. I still think that that's a valid mission, but I think it lacks sustainability. And I think that we should consider putting sustainability in, and obviously I'm interested in your thoughts. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. What would you define sustainability in connection with the mission statement?
Well, I would be mainly thinking about housing, because certainly we don't want any car dependent estates. We want that housing to be sustainable, and we want the town to be sustainable. So one of our policies further on in our plan is to protect little local shops. There are some near us, Whitesides and Taylors and so on. Little stands of local shops, they are important for having a little local community that's not the whole of Colne.
They're the heart of our community.
Oh yeah.
Businesses like that.
Yeah.
Heart of our community.
And in fact, when we tried to introduce that policy, if you remember, Michael, we had some pushback from Pendle about supporting those little local shops and pubs and so forth. So I think sustainability, which is something that obviously for the updated plan, I would like to see more of in our evidence base, and I'll come on to that. I think it should be there in our vision.
Because one thing that worries me, and it's something a lot of people don't seem to be able to take on board, probably through lack of research. If you look at the national census returns for Colne, I'm not talking about the country, but for Colne, over the last 40, 50 years, you'll actually discover that Colne has now developed quite a stable population. Yeah, okay, shrunk since the early 20s, but it's got a relatively stable population. Now, we're being told we've got to build new houses, right? We've got to.
Yes, we have to.
But although if we've got a stable population, then the only reason why you need new houses is if you are going to artificially increase the size of the population. Now, that then puts the question forward. If you artificially increase the population of an area which has been stable and self-supporting, does it then cease to be self-supporting? Can the actual existing infrastructure of a stable community support an artificially? And by the way, it's only increased in order to make developers rich. People can go on about they need. No, reality check is that a rich person wants even more money and is prepared to destroy green fields and people's lives in order to make a profit.
Well, Ian, I think a lot of us might understand what you're saying, but in terms of the framework that we have to operate in, we have no choice. The Tier 1 service centres of Barn, Aldswick, Nelson and Colne, and we'll come on to this in the private bit of the meeting, have to take 70% of the housing target. The housing target is non-negotiable. There are no ways out of the housing target. So we have to take our share of that 70% of 333. And we can't say we've got a stable population. We can't use these arguments. They won't be interesting to an inspector. David.
I suppose though we are drafting the plan based on our share of 148, because that's what the proposed local plan will be based on. And that's the thing on the table. So if we take our share of that, despite the fact Pendle are working towards the 333 in a year or two's time, that's our share of it. In terms of that vision statement, it doesn't actually mention the word housing at all.
No.
Talks about natural and built heritage, but that's obviously old stuff, or the new stuff. I think we can get the word sustainably in there.
I would put it with attractive, thriving and sustainable. I would put it so that we've got 3 adjectives there at the beginning of the mission statement. Bill?
I struggle with sustainability.
Okay.
Because to me, it's in the eye of the beholder. It can mean what you want it to mean. I think one of the key things which would be useful is to have a definition of what we mean by sustainability.
And that's what our evidence base is for.
Yep.
This is one sentence that sets out essentially all the stuff that comes after it and the detail that comes after it. There is? Yeah.
I think it's paragraph 7 and 8 of MPPF set out the government's definition of sustainability, and it has a social objective, an economic objective, and an environmental objective. So if you look at, I talked about the local plan examination. One of the things that the inspector, will be looking at is the plan sustainable, and they will look at it from those three perspectives. If you look at planning decisions, particularly appeals, if you look at the sort of how they turn, the sort of conclusions in those, the inspector, he or she again will look at those three elements to say, on balance, is this development sustainable?
So do you think I've chosen a word that's too loaded and therefore we should go for another word?
I don't think it's loaded, because in terms of planning policy, it's definable because it's in there. What had happened, and I wouldn't suggest you do this, but what had happened after the first version of MPPF, was it back in 2012? The planning inspectorate introduced a model sustainability policy that all plans in the area were pretty much forced to sort of include. But I think in time it just became superfluous, because if you have that word there, national policy sets out what that means, and that can then be assessed.
But does it not change depending on the area as well? What the definition of sustainability
the definition does change, but
what is needed in each area in order to achieve sustainability?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to go on to say is the definition does not change because it's set in national policy, but for a decision maker, whether that's a planning committee or a planning inspector, the weight that they give to those three elements may differ in different areas. So if it's the Lake District National Park, it might be the environmental objective, but equally, if there's a deep need for, I don't know, sort of local housing for local workers, they may actually say, well, the economic and social objectives are imperative.
But that will be laid out. That will be laid out later on, wouldn't it? When you're creating your priorities.
I just think by using the word sustainability, you have that backup because it's in national policy.
But I think it needs to be referenced back to the planning framework. Just have a look at the three areas. It talks about economic objective. It's about having the right mix of houses. It's about the social infrastructure. It's about having the support infrastructure, doctors, and so on and so forth. Everything that we've been through, my recent experience of planning has just been, let's just put the biggest houses possible to drive the biggest profit, rather than what the area needs. And I think it's critical that we use that, because if the plan's going to be used to drive developers, then we should be stating what we want for our area.
Well, obviously,
but this was in December last year, Michael? The MPPF.
yes.
Yeah.
So that's the latest version. That's the latest you can go with until somebody comes along and says, here's a new version. Be compliant with what's on the table at the moment, rather than trying to second guess, because you can always then make the amendments if a new MPPF is published.
The whole time that I've been a councillor, which is now 12 years, we've never had a actual local plan. So we've had a thing called the core strategy, but what has happened is it's opened Pendle to a series of one-off planning decisions, really, isn't it? So each one is only looked at on the merits of that one-off planning application. We're only allowed to consider that planning application. We can't say, oh, there aren't any doctors in North Colne. I don't know whether there are. There aren't any doctors there, or there aren't any schools there. We don't take that into account because we look at the planning application that's in front of us. The point of the local plan is to stand back and see the bigger picture. And that ultimately is what we're hoping that would guide the planning applications and the planning decisions and would lead to fewer wholly speculative planning applications. I think that's how it's meant to be. I've never operated where there's been an actual local plan. Been the core strategy only. So because of that, we've never had, these are the sites, this is what's happening. We've never had that.
But planning applications come in and they say, they use the word is sustainable in their eyes.
Yes.
But not against what you could have something defined in your plan that says this is what we mean by sustainable and this is what we expect you to comply with.
Well, it's
So,
that.
if we're going to use, if the plan is going to have any teeth,
Mm.
I think it needs to be in there.
Okay. All right. People like that idea. We can talk more about what we mean by it as we go on. Yes, of course. So
If you take the NPPF definitions, you can lift those, put those in, and then you apply them with the current NPPF. Yeah,
but what Michael has just said, that different areas will have a different emphasis depending on what those areas are. And we can explain more in the update to this plan of what's, so for example, if you look at some of our policies, or an example.
Yeah, I think the discussion's a bit sort of cross purposes. There's the high level national policy in terms of the definition of sustainable development. That translates then at Pendle Borough level through the local plan, and then equally through your neighbourhood plan, as long as it's consistent with national policy, in general conformity with the strategic policies in the local plan, you can then have local policies setting out what you would be looking for to make a development sustainable. And the existing neighbourhood plan has
that. It exactly does that. So for those of you that don't know, officers write a report on any planning application and they reference the NPPF, they reference Pendle policies, they might have SPDs from Pendle, and then it comes to the local plan. So there are things that have happened that in the last, since our plan has been made, where planning applications that, for example, would have been approved, perhaps fall foul of our design code, so therefore are rejected. And we've had, especially on boundary treatments, our design code is very clear that it doesn't like plastic fences or closely bordered timber fences. We like hedges, we like dry stone walls, we like formal stone walls with railings. This is laid out in our design code. So if something comes that would have passed in, I don't know, Barnoldswick, they don't have a design code, comes to Colne Area Committee, and it doesn't pass because it falls foul of our design code. So our made neighbourhood plan already has made a difference quite a few times, but it's considered every single time the neighbourhood plan policies are looked at in the planning officer's report. And David has fought very hard for that because initially they tried to bypass it, didn't they?
They do keep, well, occasionally forgetting.
Oh.
If you say it's in Colne, please reference policy number 3. It's in the rural area, policy number 14, please. There are a few which are focused, obviously, more than others, but yeah.
So with regard to the vision, that tweet that I'd like to make to the vision, Would the rest of you like to make any other changes to that vision? And it won't be for 2030, it will be to 2040. You happy with it?
I think it makes sense.
Okay. So, then the next section of our plan, I think, really needs a lot of updating. It's something that I think I can do. It's looking at all the stats. There's a history section, which obviously hasn't changed. But section 4 is called Colne Today. And it's all the stats about Colne. But nearly all the stats are from the in this plan are from the 2011 census. And of course, since then, we've had the 2021 census, and we've had other stats that's part of the Pendle local plan evidence base. So we can change this section a lot to represent what's happening in Colne today, from our demographics to car ownership, housing types, all kinds of things. How many skilled trades occupations there are. A lot of this stuff I've discussed it at Colne Town Council. It's on the ONS website too. So I think that one needs a heavy revision. I'm happy to put myself down for it. Yeah? Yeah?
Yeah, well volunteered.
Not that happy to put myself down for it. I will do it. So that brings the next stage is section 5. And this is sort of just talking exactly what we've spent most of the meeting talking about. It's the planning policy context. It's highly nerdy. I would say that all of this is Michael Wellock, and just looking at that context, updating it for the new MPPF and what we know about the emerging Pendle plan for the time being. So that needs, I would say, complete rewriting. Then I've written here, revisit the images throughout. Now, a lot of the images in the neighbourhood plan came from Paul Foxley. So I'm looking at him, he's not looking at me. And I'm hopeful that you would be prepared to consider updating our images for Colne. And I actually think, having looked at some of the images that you've done before, that in many ways, bits of the town, we've tried to make Colne more Coney with the design code. We've been harsher in the conservation area with shop fronts. And I think that's yielded dividends. And I actually think, not wholly, but actually the next set of pictures for the updated plan will actually show an overall improvement, which is a pat on the back for us, really, in terms of public realm and in terms of businesses and buildings.
Just a quick question. Obviously, at the back of the document, we had all those little vertical collages, didn't we, where it was all brought together. Do we need to update those, do you think? Or
Well, that's really what I'm
did
needing.
they add anything, Michael?
I think they show the market town character.
They're a nice stretch of
Yeah.
things as opposed to just a snapshot.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they need updating. I think the point that they were illustrating.
It's a sort of town centre.
Maybe adding any that you think.
There was a
Yeah.
whole appendix set
Yeah,
aside.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember the
Okay, so Paul, are you happy to consider that?
yeah, I wouldn't update.
I'd be happy to consider providing some updated images, individual images.
Okay.
But those photo or whatever we call them, those strips with the per block of the town centre took a considerable amount of time to do, and I did it during COVID when time was a little more readily in supply. But yeah, I would struggle to do that, to
Okay.
update those. And I'm just trying to recall exactly what the point was that those were trying to illustrate? I mean,
I think it was really the
It's pretty
difference
much just-
between the conservation area part of town and what we call the Colne redevelopment area that was the top of town, showing the market town character versus the area that was able to be redeveloped.
well, actually, if I'm not mistaken, they didn't really cover the, it covered the conservation area, did it not? Or it didn't cover much more than that.
But the only heritage,
it
I thought that you'd done
It
Birtwistle
stopped
House.
at the red line for
Yeah, you'd done Birtwistle House because it got a sort of rather denigratory picture caption that, didn't it? Okay. So if we could, yeah.
Are we going to include anything about the new market architecturally?
So that was actually the next thing I was coming to.
And I've noticed that some of the shops have now changed hands
Yeah.
and different frontage.
Yeah.
And so, and the one with the viaduct, the little workshop next to it, has been demolished. So there's various
Tweaks
things
to
that
make.
we might need to tweak.
To
about
update,
those,
yeah, that's it. So moving on to policy CNDP1, Colne Market Town.
Sorry, can I just go back to that? So
Okay.
what are we saying in terms of updating photographs?
So you're not doing the montages,
No.
but just looking throughout where we've got the imagery and just considering whether we do need to update because there's been
Yeah,
a big change.
individual images. Yeah, okay.
So Colne Market Town. Now, since we did our plan, there's been an excellent master plan for Colne done by Pendle Council, and I think that we should reference that. It's got aspiration in it for places like Newmarket Street and Craddock Road. So I would like to reference the Colne master plan within CNDP1. And I'd like to ask you a question about the dreaded hot food takeaway wording. There's been an awful lot that's happened about hot food takeaways near schools. And we've got some pretty bad stats in terms of childhood obesity, childhood health outcomes. Could we look to beef up our wording on hot food takeaways in light of that evidence? Ash Sutcliffe has contacted a man whose name I can't pronounce. David, can you pronounce his name? Seth is something, many syllables.
Don't know.
No, the director of health at LCC. So we've got some extra evidence base on that.
In short, yes.
Okay, so
It's
that's
been
the
done- it's
thing.
been done elsewhere.
So that's the thing that we can do then. So that's a change.
I think as well on that one, again, when you get planning applications through, although it sort of references it vaguely here, we get a lot of comments about things like the environmental, the social downsides of such places.
ASB.
Parking is another one. You know, there's never anywhere to park. People go there and there's the double yellow lines and all that kind of thing. So all the sorts of things that get rejected have lots of good reasons, which we could try and lift a bit and focus in our thing.
And actually, recently, our hot food takeaway wording was successfully used to turn down a hot food takeaway on Dockeray Street. So I just would like to boost it some more. I think we could look at ASB as an evidence base, and I think we could look at childhood obesity. Does anybody else like to make any additions or changes to CNDP1? Oh, Ian?
Yeah, because obviously again, this key wording, Colne Market Town.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I know I'm going back early 2000s. We were worried then that Colne Market is virtually non-existent. Outdoor market, which is what we were actually famous for, is virtually non-existent. And I think we need to bring that market feel back. It's like I say, we've got an indoor market, but historically, we've never been famous for our indoor market. I think we did once, but that was Nelson that got burnt down. But
Well, I was burnt down too,
yeah,
1945.
that's it. So, but we should be looking at ways of increasing the outdoor market.
Okay.
And one of the recommendations I put forward, this is back in the early 2000s, and this was actually done in a place called Winchester. They used to have an horrendous problem with buskers. They come up with a bright idea. Anybody who wanted to busk in Winchester had to audition in front of the councillors. And if the councillors approved, they were given a license to busk. Suddenly, within a week or two, people were flocking into Winchester to listen to the buskers.
Oh, those councillors have ears.
Yeah, because previously people were avoiding it because the buskers were so bad. And when they said no, every busker had to audition in front of the councillors, it actually worked.
Well,
And there's a
buskers. Perhaps
Yeah.
we should have a busking policy. What do we think?
yeah. Well, I actually put this forward, and
Okay.
unfortunately, the council of the day, my colleagues, were horrified.
Oh, well, okay. Well, perhaps I'll give you a job then, because we all have to share these things out. Would you like to draft a busking policy and bring that to the next meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
We did talk about it when the R&B festival's on, didn't we?
We did, but it would be great to have it year
if
round.
only this could be the rest of the year. That
With
was going to make
regard
it
to the outdoor
more
market,
vibrant.
Kendal Council is now tendering for market operator. Apparently, there are interested parties to operate the market, and that will be the indoor and outdoor market. So it will be fresh ideas, fresh blood, verve. Obviously, we're expecting there's going to be a big boost to that. I'll be surprised if it's just the lady that sells the hamburgers with the fried onions on her own. I think it hopefully see a bit of a renaissance.
Well, believe it or not, Chair, what I was actually told way back was that the reason why market traders won't come into Colne is we don't have the footfall. And the reason why we don't have the footfall is because there's no market traders.
Okay, well, let's look at trying to sort of think about whether we can do some form of work that talks about the importance of the outdoor market. Let's look at that then, Gina. Let's look at that.
Chair, under the CNDP 1, the town centre redevelopment zone.
Yes.
I do think that needs looking at as to whether it's proving effective. In relation to the market development, it's obviously ongoing.
Yeah.
I find it difficult to see how that proposal actually fits with the policy as stated in our neighbourhood plan. And so I'm a bit unsure as to how effective its implementation is, put it that way, thus far, and whether there's anything we should do to bolster that.
Okay.
I'm thinking particularly, I mean, for instance, at the end of that policy, towards the end of, at the end of that policy about the town centre redevelopment zone, it talks about developments having to, or proposals that they should demonstrate that they're consistent with and do not prejudice the long-term comprehensive redevelopment of the whole town centre redevelopment zone. And I'm not aware of anything that's been, any evidence that's been produced to demonstrate that, how the market development is consistent with the rest of that policy. So, I just think that we need to look carefully at that policy as to its effectiveness and effective implementation, and then also in terms of the materials. I mean, maybe we'll come on to that anyway in relation to specifically the materials policy, but item F of that town centre redevelopment zone policy says it should respond positively to the location and significance of designated and non-heritage assets. And as far as I'm aware, that development wasn't even, there wasn't even any conservation advice obtained. Yet it faces onto the red line, which is a listed building.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm questioning the effectiveness, that's all.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. No, I think there was, I do seem to remember that, looking at David for, yeah, there was, wasn't
It's
there?
not in the conservation area, is it?
No, but it faces it,
On the edge,
it
faces-
faces the,
It faces a
Yeah.
listed
On the
building.
other
It
side
would be
it is.
normal,
yeah,
certainly for a thing of that size, to have conservation advice.
Yeah.
Obviously,
I think
the
it was, Paul.
local authority no longer has its own conservation specialist, so there's a cost to it, and I understand how there might be a reluctance sometimes for Pendle Council to actually implement, you know, to incite, induce that cost. But that's no excuse, I'm afraid. And this specifically says that it should respond positively, and I have some doubt as to whether in practice it does.
Okay, so what would you advise?
In particular, if I can just add on that, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but as one example, the material palette has been changed since the initial proposals, so that the approved materials aren't, you know, the cladding on the upper part isn't the original material proposed. It's been approved as a colour coated aluminium, whereas the original proposal was for a patinated zinc. Very different materials.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah.
that's not a planning issue,
No.
and that doesn't address planning policy in our own neighbourhood plan.
Okay.
So if you're saying that they couldn't afford it, then thank you. That's an open, you know, that's an open invitation to any old material goes in Colne.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'll bear that in mind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So go on, Michael. What do you think? Page 29.
I think Paul raises 2 points. The first is around the actual wording in the neighbourhood plan,
Yes.
and the particularly wording he points to about development not affecting any future comprehensive redevelopment of that zone. From recollection, that was something the examiner asked us about, and I think we did offer a change. I think it was changed. So maybe there's an issue there in terms of the wording was flawed. But I think the wider point is that, and this is an issue for neighbourhood plans across the country, there's a huge imbalance between you as the plan maker and others who are the decision makers. So you write the policy, but you don't make the decisions. And the imbalance, of course, is how much weight they attach, if at times any, to the policies that you have. Yeah. I think the only way we can look at that is since the plan was made, is to sort of do a thorough analysis of each application that's been made since then, and has it highlighted the correct policy in the neighbourhood plan, and has it been used part of the decision making. I think if once we do that analysis, and then we, you know, if we reach the conclusion, well, you know, and I'll just throw a figure out here that I have no basis of fact on, but if we find that in terms of 50% of decisions, officers and members are not even referencing the policy, then I think the issue is not about the policies in the plan. The issue is about how Pendle as decision makers are using not just yours but other neighbourhood plans, and that needs, to my view, is that needs tightening up.
Okay.
And it is an issue because we, working, in not just locally but elsewhere, we do find that there is a wide range from some local authorities, quite religiously referencing in their officer reports neighbourhood plan policies and using them, to others where it seems to simply be ignored. It's just something that took place but really doesn't have any impact on how we make decisions at all.
Or is it just when it fits?
No, I could show you one example where I'm fairly adamant it's just never been used.
Yeah.
And that's a review that I'm doing elsewhere.
Right.
And I've gone through the applications and I can't see anywhere where it's been used.
Okay, so Michael, would you like to look at that wording, or do you feel?
You can look at the wording, but I think the bigger point for me is how the plan policies are used.
Okay.
I think that's the bigger point, because if they're not used, even to the fact that they're referenced and discounted, if they're not used, then to be frank, in a way, you're wasting your time. My view is that just as an officer report would list out the relevant development plan policies, it would list out the relevant neighbourhood plan policies.
And they do.
I think let me partially reassure you in that, as I say, in the majority of applications, the Colne neighbourhood plan is mentioned from the word go.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've said, this is in Fulridge, no point referencing CNDP
Yeah,
or
sometimes we
anything.
try to
And then
put it into Fulridge.
Other times they miss it out.
Yeah.
I think what they are sometimes guilty of, and this was particularly in the early days, where they put in like a short sentence of 2, 3, 4 lines or so. CNDP 6 says the following, or 14 says, and then they'll make a very glib intro para, and then they won't necessarily then, like the Pendle policies, really expand on each one and say what it says in detail.
Yeah.
So you don't get that analysis of comparison of the detail, and therefore once they conclude, well, it's fine with the MPPF, it's fine with the Pendle plan, and it's okay with the Colne as well. But you don't get that debate and discussion. The only time you ever see it really in detail is the design code one.
The design
where they do several times a year you see it does not comply with the design code, full stop. And Pendle hasn't got one, of course.
Yeah.
There's nothing
job.
formal written
No.
down.
There's no formal.
We're very lucky that David is the chairman of Colne area and is all over
So I'm the
our
one.
neighbourhood plan.
I'm the one that does it most of the time. Yeah. Cheers.
I think,
Yeah. That's right.
yeah,
Thank you.
But I tell you the top, yeah.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
I think whilst there's no policing goes on, the key point is your neighbourhood plan forms part of the development plan for Pendle. So therefore, because planning law states planning applications should be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise, it should be referenced because it's got the same legal standing as the core strategy, the new local plan. It's the same legal standing. So if it's being ignored, then there's really, it's a failure, I think, of procedure, and perhaps it's a bigger point that needs addressing. With the sounds of it, Pendle are probably sort of one of the good guys on this, but I can point to examples where it just seems it was just something that happened at a period of time, and it really doesn't have any impact on how we make decisions anymore.
Okay, right, interesting. Alice?
I'm just wondering about the new changes, perhaps with the traffic flow in the centre of town and Craddock Road, and what impact that would have on the atmosphere in the town centre. Obviously, the bus station is going to be redesigned, and I don't know how close we are to getting any plans on that.
Yeah, no, I think we're very close, Alice, and I think it really does sort of deliver a lot of the things that we want to do. So Craddock Road was never really a road, and it's still not a road. And if you walk along it, you feel sad because the traffic's all zooming by in one direction. And it's a road where you're hurrying to somewhere that is a real place, I suppose. That's how I always feel. So there'd be a big improvement there because slower traffic encourages
And we should
social interaction
mention
of
this,
people.
shouldn't we, in our neighbourhood plan?
Well, it sort of is there in terms of
Isn't that what's referred to in terms of the
Yeah.
long-term overall redevelopment plan?
yeah.
We've done quite a chunk of it with the market and some of the other refurbs and whatever. And then the longer term thing, which could be quite short to medium term at this rate, will be Craddock Road, will be other shop changes, the bus station, as you say, and an outdoor market to go with it.
I don't think that's at variance with this.
I'm just wondering if we're doing this update and these things are actually already done, then what's the point of having them?
Oh no. Oh, absolutely.
We need to say that these are items that are going to be ongoing.
So that was what I was saying in terms of bringing in the Code Master Plan, because it lays out quite a bit of this in more detail. And I don't think we can improve on what the Code Master Plan has done there. They even have a whole section on Craddock Road and what that could be and what it could be like. So if you've not read that, read that, because I think you'd feel happier. Okay, moving on to CNDP 2, shop fronts. What I've noticed as a member of the planning committee in Colne is that when there have been changes to shop fronts, or particularly ones that are in the conservation area, what they try to do quite often is remove the stall riser on the shop front. And I noticed that our policy here talks about verticality of window emphases and pilasters carried down to ground level, but we don't mention the stall riser, and I think that that's an omission because it comes up quite a lot in planning applications. And I'll tell you something else that we don't mention, but I see quite a lot of, especially in the conservation area, but also at the top of town. Burrows has got it, for example, is the special shop thresholds that are marble or mosaic. And I think that we should have a policy on those to retain them, because they don't appear anywhere. And they're the kind of thing that you literally step over, but they're actually quite lovely and part of characterful Colne. So I would like to add 2 policies to the shop fronts, one on stall risers, one on thresholds. Stall riser is like a stone section from the ground before the window starts. And obviously in Colne, quite a lot of the time, it's that shape because there's a hill. And it's very, very typical. And we've seen a lot of planning applications where they want to take the glazing down to the ground, haven't we, David?
Yeah, that's right.
Ian?
Thank you, Chair. I think that as well, this ties in with developing Colne as a market town.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, if you're going to visit somewhere, do you want to go, say, 20, 30 miles at your expense to visit a town that looks exactly like the town that you've just come from? You know, because if you do, I think you need sort of professional help. You know, yeah, you know what I mean? But by bit, and there's, I think Keithley, there was an arcade there and that, and I think they wanted them, and they actually kept it, they restored it to how it looked, and it brought people in. There's a lot of towns are now going back to pre-60s destruction and bringing back the traditional shop fronts, and they're actually finding it's drawing people in because people want to look at something different to these horrible new towns they're living in that have been destroyed by the councillors of the past.
Okay, but playing devil's advocate and looking at Paul, we are talking about what's existing here. We're not talking about new shops. We're not suggesting that we put in these features into new shops. We're talking about protecting what's already there.
Yeah, but also on that as well is maybe there are grants available. They have been in the past. I know it's tricky, but to try and encourage, if there's a new shop setting up, to actually encourage them to stick to their traditional shop frontage.
Well, of course,
Bring
we
it
have
back.
that in the conservation area generally. It's just these features haven't been mentioned.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to echo what Councillor Robinson said. I mean, I was in Burnley quite recently, and they've done that on St
Yes.
James's Street. They've
Yeah.
done it quite well with. They've only done it with a couple of the shops. They've not done it with the whole row, but they've done it quite well. I'd like to see something like that we can put in for maybe the shops on Albert Road, because
We did apply for this. It was called the Heritage Action Zone, and the Colne Bid and Colne Town Council applied for this, and I worked really, really hard on it, and we didn't get it. So we were offered a debrief with Historic England. Why didn't we get it? And they said, your ideas were great, and bob on. I'm like, okay. And I said, so why didn't we get the money? And they went, you weren't supported by LCC or Pendle Council. So because we didn't get the support, we were not considered shovel ready, and because we weren't shovel ready, we didn't win. So sad. We tried. Okay, so listen, none of this is set in stone. So if when you go home tonight you think, oh, I should have said this, we're a group that emails each other. So don't think that we're not going to ever discuss shop fronts again. If you have a thought on it, please let me know, but I'd like to add those two.
According to the minutes, we should have a WhatsApp group, shouldn't we? Jane?
We do have WhatsApp group.
There we go.
There we go. We'll start it. Okay, so that's CNDP2. We need to.
Ian's on it. He's a very active poster. He's just acknowledging that. Then.
Yeah, go on, Alice.
I was just thinking, do we have any policy about selling items on streets?
No.
You know the company I
Don't worry about that.
thinking about.
Don't worry about that. The lease has been rewritten, and you'll only be able to sell flowers. But could we have a policy on selling things on pavements? I mean, it's LCC, really, isn't it? It's not a plan.
No.
Ian.
Thank you. Daft question. Is there a way of restricting the types of retail premises within a town centre? And I'm thinking again the hot food takeaways, because if we're not careful at this rate, you'll be able to walk from the Crown up to the commercial.
Well, we have a policy on hot food takeaways,
Yeah.
and it caused a lot of stress to provide the evidence base. A great deal of stress, wasn't it, that one?
Yeah, because I think we've got enough takeaways and Turkish barbers.
No, we can't do anything about Turkish barbers.
Yeah, I think we have enough barbers and takeaways now to sort of deal with the large city.
I mean, the planning classes for shops have now been recently relaxed, haven't they, in the last couple of years?
Yeah.
And now it's very, very difficult to classify things, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess. You've got the policy on hot food takeaways, but yeah, I think this is it's a difficult one because traditional planning policies tried to protect what were called A1 retail uses, which is your butchers, your bakers.
Candlestick maker.
Whereas, because, with very few exceptions, the decline of the high street has meant that planning policy has been relaxed, and it's a case of, it's in some ways attracting whatever we can get. The Pendle approach remains quite restricted, in terms of the frontage policies, and your neighbourhood plan reflects that.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to relax it, because by relaxing it, you just cheapen an area that drives down footfall.
Yeah, Keighley was mentioned. I'm working in Keighley, and what you've been saying around this table is probably amplified even greater there in terms of how they feel that their centre is performing. This is not. It is, as I said, with a few exceptions, it's a national issue. And those exceptions tend to be areas that have got quite phenomenal local purchasing power. And they can support this wide range of independent retailers because there's money to spend. Where you don't have that money to spend, the shops you would want, you don't get. And I think that really is the bottom line. It is an economic issue more than anything.
Okay, we need to pick up the pace. We've got a lot to do. So, okay, next one is CNDP3, the design code, which I think has been very successful. The only area where we've definitely failed on, and this is a wording issue, I feel, is lighting in developments outside the settlement boundary. We talk in our policy about dark skies and sensitive lighting and what have you, but every single time this has come up, we've got glaring things, massive monopoles, totems, and ordinary lamp standards that are bright in rural areas or outside the settlement boundary. So that policy has really disappointed us. Has repeatedly disappointed us. So I'd like you, please, to look at a form of words where we would succeed on it.
Yeah.
Because we believe one thing, but then when it came to it, it wasn't that
But the
thing.
feedback was that there were no dark skies.
It was basically
Also-
because dark skies had
Only
got
in Northumbria,
Yeah.
National
Yeah.
Park.
Yeah, well,
It's
It's just-
let Michael come back.
Penalty.
No, go on.
Yeah, quite a few years ago, there was a bit of a controversial one. Down Burnley Road, where the junction is to Greenfield Road,
Yeah,
there's that triangle of grass with a footpath down,
yeah.
and a firm wanted to put lighting columns down that path. And there was a big deal. And the council's objection was it was too bright.
Oh.
And what the business did, they used, I believe they were called mushrooms. It was like lampposts,
Yeah.
but it's done in such a way that the lights
Low
force
level light.
downwards,
Yes,
so it doesn't go upwards.
yes,
And it worked perfect.
yes.
Those lights, sadly, have seemed to have disappeared over the years.
Yes.
And
We wanted a consideration of sensitive lighting
Yeah.
for things outside the settlement boundary, and it's not what we've got.
I think
Anyway.
also within the settlement boundary as well, in a lot
Well,
of areas,
Okay,
and that putting lighting that is actually down. I can't remember what they call it now. The lighting that forces downwards instead of upwards. We could put that in as a policy.
okay. Michael?
Yeah, I think this is one where the revised national planning policy could help, because I think the issue, the different, let me call it a difference of opinion that we've had with Pendle Council is that they took the very hard line that there were no designated dark skies in Colne, which we made the point that we weren't trying to designate the area of dark sky, we were trying to limit light pollution. Anyway, paragraph 198C of national policy says limit the impact of light pollution from artificial light on local amenity, intrinsically dark landscapes and nature conservation. So I think there's something there to hang a new policy in.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you obviously made a note of that. Have you got the number?
1982.
Okay.
198C.
198C. Okay.
So by that, you could even dictate the type of lighting that's used.
Yes, exactly.
You know, LEDs or whatever. Without the BMW driver who blinds you when they come up behind you.
Okay. So if we could move on from the design code to CMDP4, which is the non-designated heritage assets, started off as 12 through. I've got a little list, and the list that I've got is the park, which is a large villa above Park Primary. There's a very big house that I once stumbled on while litter picking off White Walls Drive. It looks rather stunning, and I'd like to potentially include that. It's like an 1880s villa. There's a magnificent modernistic Edwardian house on Barrowford Road that I once met the owner of. It really is stunning. Then I've heard, because they're not necessarily buildings, they could be structures. So looking at Emma, what about the ponds on the Lenches? Were they the remnants of a mill? The brickworks.
They are already listed on the Lancashire, called the Lancashire Heritage Assets. They're already listed.
Okay. As a non-designated heritage asset.
No, it's something.
Perhaps you could find that for me, because I was thinking about including them as a non-designated heritage asset. And if you know all about the history and the brickworks, okay, okay, add that to the list. Gina's writing. Also, the mill that's behind the former Vauxhall garage on North Valley. David and I were stuck in traffic, and I looked at it again with fresh eyes. It's very elegant. I'd like to look at that. These are things to consider rather than put in at this stage, because there are tests. But let's, and then what was he called? Nice chap from Waterside, Colin. He said he had a couple, didn't he? But he didn't want to slow down the plan by telling you about them.
Yes, he did.
He said, I don't want to slow down the plan by telling you about them. So could I ask Gina that you get in touch with Colin and ask him, now's the moment for us to look at adding. So potentially we've got the park, Edwardian house on Barrowford Road, big house on White Walls Drive, ponds and lodges on the Lenches, mill behind the former Vauxhall garage, Collins 2 and Reed Road. Go on.
Atkinson Street.
Atkinson Street's on.
Is it on? It's already on. Yeah. Also, the area as well, because we mentioned this at the Gibfield Guardians group, working group,
Yeah.
is the actual Lenches itself, because the Gibfield goes in. It's in Nelson, it's Castercliff.
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned before, it looks like there could have been a really important Celtic settlement that actually stretched from Castercliff Hillport in Nelson all the way to the Lenches in Colne.
Yes. Now, on my desk that I haven't started yet, I've been given a book by an archaeologist who has done studies into this, and it's a job for me to do. So I'll look into it. But I've got to read this book before I come to any conclusion on it.
Because that would make quite a difference, because if it's actually recognised as a Celtic settlement by English heritage, it could generate a lot of interest in the area, especially if you put if Lenches is one of the last remnants of that old system from the Celts. It'd be quite unique. And it does this, and it would give more protection. And I say it would draw a lot of interest into Pendle, as well as playing on its historical connection as a border town, which people tend to forget.
Well, I've got this archaeologist's number. When I've got stuck into his book, and I've got the time, I will, perhaps give him a call. Okay. Anybody?
Are
Anything
there
else?
any to take out?
There are some to take out,
Yeah.
sadly. So we will need to take out, in my view, potentially,
Is it number 50?
potentially
Number,
18,
number 50, yeah.
number 50. Yes, 14 to 18,
Been
Keighley Road.
renovated.
I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I know it's been spoiled, but there will be some to take out. There's the pumping house of the mill, which has been demolished. So I've written to Historic England, and they are assessing Colne Chapel Cemetery, gate piers, and everything to do with the cemetery for listing. So they're looking at that now. But yeah, so it looks like we add 8, probably take 2 out, and 1 might become a listed building, in which case, or a listed, 2 might become listed structures, in which case they come out of this list anyway. But I'm happy to take all of that on. Alice?
Did we have a look at Bethel on Burnley Road?
It's in.
Is it? I couldn't see it.
Yes.
It's there.
Yes.
Right, that's fine.
Yeah.
Given its
Yeah,
connection with Wallace Hartley.
Yeah.
Bethel Chapel's in twice, actually.
Oh, is it?
Well, there were 2.
There are 2 of them.
There were 2
Yeah,
of them.
yeah.
Numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're both number 13.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's that.
Yeah, Chair, very, very briefly on that. I'm glad to say on street signs,
Yes.
there's 2 new ones appeared on Exchange Street,
There you go.
School Street,
Yeah.
this end School Street, and Cross School Street.
It's not a coincidence, is it?
Mm.
No.
But they still haven't painted the street sign at the back of the mosque.
Different men.
So Sarah, find it. Down, so it's got like council, historic environment.
Okay, well that's different. So we'd be looking at them from a heritage perspective here. If you have a look at the non-designated heritage assets, there are different reasons why something could be included. So this would be a trace of the industrial past of Colne. Okay, so policy CNDP5, urban character areas, which are the areas that aren't conservation areas, but we felt were special. We are hopeful, are we not, David, that Keighley Road urban character area will stop being urban character area and start becoming the conservation area.
Yep.
And similarly, we are also hopeful that the castle on Castle Road will stop being the castle on Castle Road and become part of the Lidget and Bent's conservation area extension. So they're just things that we're watching. They may come out of this part of the plan. Okay, we're skipping over 6 and then going to 7, which is protecting local green spaces. So Michael and I have discussed this in the past, and his advice then was that we don't consider putting the Upper Rough or Lenches as a potential local green space pending what happens with the Pendle local plan. Because if the Pendle local plan make it a local green space, then it just is a local green space. Because it's down to be, both of those are down in the Pendle local plan to be local green spaces.
Yeah, I think that conversation was based on the assumption that the local plan examination would take place before you produce any revised neighbourhood plan.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about, we're not going to produce anything by June.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So the only sort of caveat I'd sort of say to that is that if there was a circumstance where you were going to publish something,
Yes.
then yes, you would have to publish the plan that you wanted to, see approved at referendum. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would like to add that hasn't been discussed before in terms of the neighbourhood plan, 2 new local green spaces, Langroyd Woodland, and also Briarcliff Avenue. We put this forward as a town council to Pendle as a local green space, and they said it wasn't special at all. It's very special if you live on Briarcliff Avenue. And also it's equivalent to the one, David, I'm looking at you. What's the one that's just off Castle Road that's a bit similar? Near Castley Road. What's that called?
Snell Grove.
Snell Grove. So it's much bigger than Snell Grove. And Snell Grove made it as a local green space in our plan. So I feel that was just an oversight by us in Waterside. Has anybody got any others, Ian?
Thank you. I think also as well we talk about green space, etc., the various types. One that concerns me is community woodlands.
Okay.
And a lot of people know all about the local nature reserves. But how many people know that in Colne we have at least one community woodland already?
Is that in Langroyd?
Nope.
Oh.
It's in Waterside.
Okay.
It was designated as a community woodland. Money was obtained to build the perimeter wall as a community woodland.
Right.
And the neighbourhood management of the Great Council went and padlocked it and mysteriously misplaced the key and then forgot about it.
Okay.
Bottom of Hall Street. All that woodland at the bottom of Hall Street
Okay.
is a community woodland.
All right. And do we know when this was designated?
2006, roughly.
Okay. So I need to take that up with Pendle County.
Yeah, and that was by neighbourhood management.
Okay.
Right.
All right. I'll look into that.
Yeah, and the other one I will put forward as a community woodland to save a lot of problems is the woodland in front of Patton Street.
Right.
And the reason for that is that I do know for a fact that there are more than one occasion people have put that forward as potential building land.
Yes.
The problem is because the ground is so unstable, if you was to try and build houses, you would cause structural damage to the existing houses on Patton Street.
Okay.
To protect that, by designating it as a community woodland, will protect it and stop any such damage.
Well, we have had it as a designated housing site
Mm.
in the past. So in a sense, we've got a conflict here.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's a conflict that we need to look at in more detail at another meeting, because I'm looking at my watch now and we've got a lot more policies to do. So we could park that for a later discussion and a more detailed discussion, especially when we know more about the history of it.
I feel a lot with going past the farm as a benefit.
They cannot, literally, they cannot build them.
Well, I mean, they can build anywhere, can't they, really? They can build on the polders.
Yeah.
It might not be viable to build on it. That's something else entirely. That's something else. I've seen the spring. I've seen the spring.
But there's actually cracks on the gable end of the end house on Exchange Street recently, last year or so. They've had to be patched up because of a slight subsidence.
Right. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not suggesting any discussion on it, but I noticed that the area of land to the east of Spring Grove, so that is designated in our plan as part of the green space. That's now got planning consent for 4 houses and 2 of them are in the process of, well, one of them's built, the others are nearly 3/4 built. So that needs amending to omit that. It begs the question whether that was granted while this was in place. I'm not sure, because that could be another Pendle taken any notice of our plan. But that I'm not suggesting a great debate about it, but I'm just flagging that up.
Okay, looking at David to see if he.
Which site is that, Paul? What number
By
is it?
Springs.
Yeah, the word Spring Grove's not mentioned in the report. Number 5. Paul Grove Park and Nature Reserve.
So it's the area between house,
And that's all that stuff about ribbon development and everything, isn't it? Limited infill and that sort of thing. Yes. Yeah, that whole of that Keithley Road area, some falls foul of that, doesn't it?
So we need to look at that map.
You're talking about green belt policy. This was better as part of our green space.
Gosh.
That included all the
I did not know that.
Yeah, we should
So
check.
we need to revisit the map. It's very sad. Okay. Yeah.
We did have quite a lot of discussion about the land behind South Valley Drive. You remember that it's a square piece of land and it would be a potential housing site. And I know that the residents are extremely worried about that site, and we did have quite a lot of discussion.
So let's for the same meeting where we're discussing below Patton Street, we also discuss behind South Valley Drive, Gina.
And also Dewhurst Street.
Dewhurst Street.
Green.
We didn't feel that Dewhurst Street was demonstrably special, did we? I can't remember.
A bit like Birch Wood.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that has been assessed. We could look at it again.
Yes,
That's
please.
what this is about, but that was assessed. Okay. So, policy 8, protection and enhancement of local facilities. So this is a question for you, Michael. I wondered whether we should list them.
In short, I think yes for policies 8 and policies 9.
That's what I put.
Yeah.
So I've listed them here, and I think that's something you can share with the group because I'm bound to have forgotten more than one, I'm sure. Here's my list just for you to know. So obviously SEAG, Open Door, the Citadel, the Ambulance Hall, North Valley Community Centre, Primmett Community Centre, Colne Family Hub, Waterside Youth Club, the Library, Colne Health Centre, the Dressers Working Men's Club, Fishermore, Park High, Primmett Academy, Sacred Heart Primary, Lord Street, West Street, Christchurch, Primmett Primary, St Bart's, Christchurch, Trinity Baptist Church, St John's, the Mosque on Exchange Street, Sacred Heart, New Life Christian Centre and Holy Trinity. And I'm sure that I'll have missed some out. That was just me having a little sort of brainstorm with myself this afternoon. We need to flesh out that list and do a little description for each one. And we can apportion those descriptions to people, perhaps at the next meeting, depending on which bit of Colne they're from.
Does this include theatres as well?
They're cultural venues, aren't they? Aren't they elsewhere?
Is that a different area?
Community facilities. Doesn't say so.
Because they used a lot more than like the Pendle Hippodrome.
Yeah, and we
They
could,
have the
we
craft
can include
fairs.
the Savoy Theatre, the Savoy Cinema.
Yeah, I was going to say as well. Then we've also got.
Should we include the cinema
Yeah.
theatres?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because a lot of these folk, like the Little Theatre as well, they do more than just put plays on.
So at the next meeting, Gina will come up with a putative list. Would be great if we could have a picture of each one and a sentence on each one, and we'll share that out at the next meeting. Similarly, we need to look on a map and look at all the local shops, come out with a list. Perhaps you could share with us, we could send you some suggestions. We're going to miss some.
Yeah.
And then we have a little suggestion of perhaps a little description, picture, general shop sells newspapers, cheap cider, whatever.
Can I suggest on the facilities, they're grouped together under the certain headings?
Yes.
Otherwise, it's just a random list.
Yes.
Yeah, schools, health,
Yes.
the culture,
Yes.
or whatever.
Yes. So let's beef up those policies and give a bit more detail. Okay. So CNDP 10, sport and recreation facilities. I put consider adding Proto Wheel Park, and then there must have been a reason why we didn't do this, but I can't remember what it was. Alkincoats 2 bowling greens and Alkincoats tennis courts.
Because it's a local.
Already in a park.
It's a local green space.
Is that why they weren't
Yeah,
on?
we
We didn't double designate. Right, okay. So just question mark on the Proto Wheel Park. We might just sort of protect the actual site of the Proto Wheel Park. Okay. C&D policy 11. I've dumped Gina in it for this one. I've written Gina to check that this allotment list is correct, because the allotment list is mesmerizingly complex, isn't it? Things come in, things go out. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. CNDP 12 transport. In the master plan, there's a thing about e-bike lockers, which I'm really pro because we're on a hilly place. So it would be great if you could securely lock up your e-bike and charge it. And this was quite interesting. The Town and Country Planning Association. So I just copied this because I thought it was interesting. What has come to light in the last few years is the adverse health impact of air pollution caused by our transport system and adverse health. Air pollution is linked to cardiovascular and respiratory disease, increased risks of dementia, and stunted lung and brain growth in children, and causes 40,000 premature deaths a year, according to the Royal College of Physicians. A joint investigation by The Guardian and Greenpeace found that over 2,000 schools and nurseries within 150 metres of a road emitting illegal levels of nitrogen dioxide, as well as lowering the health risks of air pollution. Increasing walking and cycling would also improve our health through increasing activity levels. Travel habits developed in childhood are hugely influential for our travel habits and activity levels across our lifetimes. A Sustrans survey in 2010 found that nearly half of all children want to cycle to school, but currently only 4% do. Open spaces and transport, high quality public spaces are all a vital component of the social life of a neighbourhood, providing spaces for people to interact as well as opportunities for commerce and events. Streets make up 80% of accessible public space, but are normally designed just for cars, not people. People are more likely to spend time talking with each other, this is Craddock Road, on streets with low traffic flows. Evidence indicates that residents on quieter streets enjoy more friendships and connections with their neighbours. I just thought that was a very sort of interesting passage that we could perhaps draw on to get some more real Colne evidence for our transport section, which I know is an aspirational section because we can't make the Colne to Skipton Railway start again, but we can have that aspiration and put that out there. Ian.
Thanks, Chair. Does Pendle still have a clean air strategy? Because they used to have one, and I do know in the early 2000s there was actually monitoring equipment in Colne. There was some on Craddock Road.
Yes.
and the report every year actually showed the levels of pollutants in those areas. Are we still doing this? Because if so, this is what we should be linking in.
So we have an AQMA on Windsor Street, and it did have automatic monitoring. And the automatic monitoring, this is pre-COVID, showed really high levels of pollution. You could look at it in real time, and you could see that it was sometimes double what it should be. And then the automatic monitoring thing failed. So please don't think that I'm putting any emphasis here, because I'm just relaying the facts. It then became monitoring, manual monitoring, as and when, with a person. And this coincided with the levels being well below the levels that would cause concern. And then last year, Pendle Council had a consultation to delist the AQMA based on the manual monitoring results. I sought the advice of the Legit Beyond member, who has a doctorate in chemistry, about how it could be that the automatic levels were one thing and the manual levels were another. And he said it could be as simple as the person who goes to do the manual levels knows to avoid rush hour. And so they go at a quiet time when obviously the levels are not high. There's nobody trying to deceive anyone, probably. It's just that you wouldn't go in rush hour to get the reading. So therefore, it could be that the stratospheric decline in pollution between the two methods is just a happenstance, really, but it's not a true reflection of what's going on. So in the consultation, I wrote to Pendle Council in detail with all of this information, and I don't know what's happening now. We've not had any further response on it, but they're very keen to delist the AQMA.
Yeah.
So, and we mention it, don't we? We mention the AQMA, do we not? If we don't, we should. Really. No, we don't. So that's a question mark. AQMA. Right, so nearly getting on. So CNDP 13, to conserve valued landscape features. I think this is a very successful policy. It's appeared in quite a few planning applications. I think it's still fine. Question, do we look at this valued landscape features with regard to onshore wind developments? That's a question for a future meeting.
I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
Giving it consideration.
Yeah.
Do you also need to include solar panel farms?
Yeah, could do. Yeah. Any other thoughts on the long range views, significant views? No?
No, I think they work really well.
They do work well. So CNDP 14, rural identity and character. Now we need to look at the wording here. Neil Watson has spoken to David about the wording and explained how Trawden Parish Council, which of course is only a village, has a more successful wording for
I think that's generally housing outside the settlement boundary.
I wondered whether we could put more emphasis to scale and form outside the settlement boundary. It's mentioned there in the policy, but perhaps be a bit more specific on scale and form. And I've said, can we insist that landscaping features and developments are retained? So on the lower rough, there was a very, very detailed landscaping plan with native trees, native hedging, and especially in the conservation area, it was thought through. And then the residents moved in and they didn't like the native trees or the native hedges and they ripped them out. So I wrote to the enforcement officer and said, but now the landscaping plan has gone and all we've got are some laurel bushes and bamboo and what's that other stuff that's blue, eucalyptus. And none of that is in any way part of the landscaping plan. And they said, oh no, it's permitted development.
But was it conditioned? How was it conditioned?
Well,
Probably just a landscape plan that's then delivered, and if anything dies in 5 years, you have to replace it and stuff like that. So the standard stuff.
Yeah.
Same on real and plastic grass as well.
It's certainly something you can look at.
Could we look at
I
that?
think that individual case, I'd be interested to see what the conditions actually said.
okay. It's grotesque. No? Anyway, so that's going through. So this afternoon or this morning, I'm chairman of the climate emergency on Pendle Council. So I wanted to look at some exemplars of other town councils or other neighbourhood plans where the policies might be interesting for us in Colne. So perhaps we need a separate meeting on this, but I'm just going to just fire a load at you, and I'm sure that Gina, Michael could say if they're non-starters, and any that perhaps aren't non-starters, we could discuss at a future meeting. So following on from the last point, can we insist on native hedgerows for developments where practical?
Are we going to go through each of these?
Yeah. And well, you can cross them out. Just cross them out if they're rubbish, and then we can focus in on the good ones. We've got to sift.
You can't insist on anything,
No.
but you could have a policy that sets out that where
So that's a possible to consider.
yes.
Okay. Can we specifically protect habitat for ground nesting birds? Because at the moment, if you're in Eastern Colne, all you can hear is the curlew wall to wall. It's just so loud and it's magnificent.
Again, you could have a criterion within a policy, but again, you couldn't introduce a blanket protection.
No.
These are all sort of detailed matters that yes, you could include with the right wording
Okay.
in a planning policy.
Okay. All right. So that's something to consider. Can we recognise our nature reserves at Greenfield Road, Ford Grove, Alkin Coates, Langroyd and Gibb Hill and insist that biodiversity net gain that's like spent in Colne has to be spent in Colne?
You could do, but would you want to?
Well, yes, because I don't want them to buy biodiversity net gain in Aberdeen.
Oh, I thought you were saying that it could only go into those local nature reserves.
Well, I was just thinking that they would be the obvious recipients.
Again, you could have a policy that says that in normal circumstances, any biodiversity net gain related to development in the area should be delivered in there.
Okay, I'd like a policy on that, please.
In fact, because of the limitations on the neighbourhood plan, you can only talk about your area. You can't
Yes.
talk about another area.
True.
Having said that, what you cannot stop is that Pendle have a local plan policy that says, well, yes, it might be in Colne, but our local plan policy says it can be in Earby, Nelson,
Yeah.
Brightfield.
Yeah. Okay. In Trawden, they have a lot of neighbourhood plan policies about garages. Garages size. They want 3 metre wide garages and things like that. And every single time their planning policy fails and they're told that they have to accept 2.6 and all the vehicles in Trawden are massive anyway. So nobody parks in the garage and it's a waste of time. And then the next thing is there's a planning application for it to be somebody's granny's sitting room or something. Can we look at policy surrounding garage size and or conversion into house?
I think the size, no. The conversion, probably no.
Okay, committed development.
Right.
Okay, so that's a no.
Gina, do you want to save the television?
Oh, no. Can we insist that all developments incorporate solar panels with battery storage or new developments, except for front-facing slopes and conservation areas? No? I'll wait for Jeannie to come back and cross that one out. I thought that was a good one.
That was a no. Was
That
it?
was a no. Can we limit front gardens becoming parking?
Again, you could have a policy that seeks to do that. but,
Okay,
you know, if somebody's got permitted development,
perhaps in certain areas.
again, if you could get the evidence together, you could have a policy.
Okay,
It's one of those. It's whether you could ever have. You couldn't have anything that's watertight.
okay. Can we encourage green back alleys? We've got some, and it would be great to have more of them.
You
Via
can,
a policy.
yeah, you can
Yeah.
encourage it.
Now, a lot of town councils and parish councils have these community energy groups. So there were community energy groups, such as Farringdon, and I was wondering whether we could try to foster a community energy group for, say, a micro hydro scheme on Colne Water.
You can, but I think you've got to remember it's got the only way you would bring that forward is there's got to be people willing
To do it.
beyond.
Well, I'm
The
fortunate.
neighbourhood
I'm fortunate because I've now got a climate emergency officer at Pendle Council, so I might set him that task to see whether that's
Right. Another one you could look at is Todmorden.
okay.
I think through their neighbourhood plan, that's what they're doing. And a colleague of mine, Louise, being a Todmorden resident, she's actually on the group that are trying to bring the project forward.
Okay, interesting, interesting. All right, now this is another thing that's a beef of mine, and I'm sure you're going to say no on this. Can we insist that any tree chopped down is replaced by another tree, or, say in conservation areas, by more than one tree?
Again, you can't insist, but you could have a planning policy on trees that says that, you know, you would seek to where a tree is lost, that it is replaced on a like for like basis. Or, yeah.
All right. Harpenden Neighbourhood Plan, final version for referendum. This is their tree policy. Trees and hedges proposals should be designed to retain ancient, veteran and mature trees, particularly in ancient woodlands, or trees or hedgerows of ecological, arboricultural or amenity value, and should be accompanied by a tree survey that establishes the health and longevity of any affected trees. Development proposals must not result in an unacceptable loss or damage to existing trees, to woodlands, hedges, or significant landscaping during or because of development. Where trees must be lost as a result of development, these must be replaced at a ratio of at least 2 to 1 within the site, with a preference for native trees and for fruit trees and nut trees. The responsible planting of additional trees that reduce or absorb air pollution from traffic will be supported through the neighbourhood plan area. All development must aim to be at least air quality neutral and not cause or contribute to the worsening of air quality. On larger developments, this should be demonstrated through an air quality assessment and, if necessary, through proposed mitigation measures. I quite like that policy in Harpenden. Do we like the policy in Harpenden?
But that's the sort of thing, we're sort of talking about in terms of the previous point about replacing trees. You would have a policy in terms of.
All right, so we need to develop that more than just we want street trees.
Yeah.
Ian?
Actually, I think the important one there as well is that word, including the word native,
Yes.
because I think there's always a danger.
You end up with eucalyptus.
Yeah, or a monkey puzzle tree.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
I would say I'm quite tempted to plant a monkey puzzle tree myself. I love them.
But is it in keeping with our heritage?
No.
Exactly. So I think, it's really need to enforce, to reinforce this idea of native species.
Yes.
And with the exception of sycamore, which I believe is not native and dangerous.
No. Okay.
Can it also cover disease trees, not just trees associated with the development?
Yes. Yes, that's actually a good point. All right. So some of the other town and parish ones had green infrastructure interrelationships. So they mapped their local green spaces and the green fingers and green corridors and created a green infrastructure network at local level. Could we do this? And if so, is this the kind of thing where we'd hire a consultant to do it? Because it seems a bit complicated for me, not the people in this room, I don't know. It could be somebody that could do it.
The answer is yes. It's been done in a variety of ways in terms of the neighbourhood plans that we've worked on.
Okay,
Not always using specialist consultants.
but there is a
Oh, there are people
Then we
who'll
could
take
tap
your, there are
into.
people who'll take your money. Yeah.
no, but I'm just we've got quite a lot to do. If that's a neat body of work, I wonder whether that's
If that's something that you decide to do, as I say, we've done it with other neighbourhood plans. The first thing I'd say is that when the new locality support package comes out, and I've heard that's not going to be now until July, look at that to see whether that could support this type of work.
okay.
The second thing I'd say is that this a few years ago was quite the sort of flavour of the month in planning.
Okay.
Planning like all things as it's sort of
Fashions.
and I've got a feeling this has
Oh no, we're out of fashion.
has had its day.
Oh.
You don't hear this as much talked about as much as you once did.
Mm,
The flavour of the month now seems to be biodiversity and net gain.
okay. All right.
I'm not saying that doesn't make it a valid approach.
No,
It's just my sort of
I think it just shows a
feeling.
joined up rather than
Yeah, yeah.
just. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Something to consider. Can we make developers plant and maintain street trees?
Again, you can't make, but you could include it in your tree policy.
Okay, because we have said we encourage, but
Yeah.
it would be nice to be a bit more forceful. Could we have an eco self-build site at Waterside? Perhaps one of the ones that Pendle Borough Council said wasn't viable in our last plan.
You can have it, but whether you could find an owner.
Because they're not. No. Pendle Council own the land, don't they? Do you remember the land that was deemed non-viable? And it's non-viable for a developer, like I don't know, Persimmon.
But again,
it might be viable for a person who's not after the money; they're wanting to live there.
well, you could have it. You could have it. The two things you need are a willing owner
Pendle Borough
and
Council.
a willing developer.
Okay.
You know, it's one of those. If
But
you're
the
willing,
developer is.
if you're willing to throw the money at it, you can do it. But whether it then sets an exemplar for anyone else, because people just turn around and say, "Well, it's a one-off."
No, but say one of the sites that failed on viability at examination, say they could fit, I don't know, 8 houses on it. Say we then put that back in our plan, same site, for eco housing, would it have to meet the viability test? Because it's Mr. Hartley and Mr. Duerden and Mr. whoever who are coming along to build their houses that they want to build for themselves.
I'm sure you could say that, but I don't think it achieves. It's so marginal; it doesn't achieve anything, does it?
Okay.
It's not going to be an exemplar that others are going to copy, nor is it going to make any great impression on your housing numbers.
It's a small thing. It's a small scale thing.
Yeah, it might act as an it might act as this is what you could do if you had,
Okay.
the correct resources, but I'm not sure how far forward it drives your neighbourhood plan.
Okay, you poured a bit of cold water on me, but I'm still liking to continue. Go on, Alice. We had several sites that were rejected at examination for viability, so they're on our map. Could we do anything to support red squirrel recolonisation in Colne, or could we link in to the Lancashire Nature Recovery Plan, which is now out for consultation? It's very good, that plan.
You can link into the nature recovery plan.
Okay.
As a town council, you could say whatever you like about the red squirrel, but I don't think you could have a planning policy. You don't have a planning.
They've been seen in Waterside gambling on the top of a fence.
Is there not too many grey squirrels in Colne?
That's it. That's not what you need to do. You need to get rid of them.
Yeah.
Edward's eaten one, hasn't he, David?
Loads of them. Oh,
Can we promote the use?
Elvis's favourite food.
Can we promote the use of the accessible green space standards to set minimum aspirational and neighbourhood-wide ambitions for the amount of green space and natural green space?
Yes.
Oh, go with that. Can we set aspirations for minimum walking distances from housing areas to green space?
Yes.
Can we suggest using urban greening factors for development in urban areas?
Sure what that means.
That means trees, planting trees and
But-
shrubs. Yeah.
You've got your tree policy.
Can we include urban tree canopy cover standards to set goals for quantity and quality of woodland cover?
You could look at it in your tree policy.
Okay.
I'm not
did
sure
we do that one?
quite what that means.
Yes, we did.
We
He said
did.
yes,
We
we
said
can
yes.
do that.
Okay.
Can we include a map of safe cycling routes and insist all new developments make provision for safe cycling? Because I mean, we can't change the fact that legit's nearly impossible.
You can
but-
include the map. You can't, as Keith said, you can't insist.
No.
But a development, where it's relevant
Okay.
and viable,
Yeah.
yes, you
No.
could have a policy that seeks, safe cycling provision.
Okay.
But for most development, that's not going to be relevant. It's going to be the larger commercial and housing development.
Which brings me on to my next question, which was, can we prevent any more car-dependent developments only by doing all these other things, presumably?
Yeah, I think we're sort of going back to where we sort of kicked off, aren't we, with the sort of the mission statement
Yeah.
in terms of making the plan more sustainable.
Yeah. Can we encourage rainwater harvesting and grey water recycling in new developments?
Does the design code not already do that?
I don't know. Can we check?
I think it's one to check.
Okay. Can we encourage heat networks and renewable energy in new developments?
You can certainly encourage it.
Because in Waterside, we've got the disused mine workings, and they would be ideal to create a delta heat network, and the government would fund 67% of the cost. Can we, I know I've done that one. Should we declare as a town council a climate emergency in town, like Froome have, and then all the policies that have just gone on about flow from that?
I think that's a question for the town council, not for me.
Okay, you need to put that on the agenda then, Gina.
You can, yeah, I don't think it's for me to advise on the climate emergency point, but Ilkley, who did declare, I think I'm correct in saying, did declare a climate emergency, then did go back to their neighbourhood plan to add lots
All
of
of
these things within policies that they already had.
Yeah, expanding.
It wasn't that they created new policies, it's just that and I think the point of this exercise we're just going through now is to make the policies green.
It is, that is the point. So for example, Froome Town Council, they had a policy LHN1, provision of well-designed energy efficient buildings and places. The design and standard of any new development should aim to meet a high level of sustainable design and construction and be optimised for energy efficiency, targeting zero carbon emissions. This includes citing an orientation to optimise passive solar gain, the use of high quality thermally efficient building materials, installation of energy efficiency measures such as loft and wall insulation and double glazing. Non-residential developments should aim to meet the Buildings Research Establishment Building Standard Excellent. Any new development to incorporate on-site energy, and we can't insist on this, they'll say it wouldn't be viable, energy generation from renewable sources, such as solar panels, and to the extent required by the NS Core Strategy, CS2. The retrofit of heritage properties and assets should be encouraged to reduce energy demand and to generate renewable energy where appropriate, providing it safeguards historic characteristics, and development is done with engagement and permissions of relevant organisations. Alterations to existing buildings must be designed with energy reduction in mind and comply with sustainable design and construction standards. I thought that was, apart from the bit where they're insisting on the heat network, which would make us unviable, I thought that was a good policy.
It's okay as a policy to encourage, but government policy, and this is long-standing, you know, with the previous administration as well. Government policy is that building standards for housing will be improved progressively through the building regulations.
Yes.
Yeah. So planning policy can encourage, but you can't
Insist.
compel.
No.
Because a developer can simply go,
I've
met the minimum standard of building regulations. You can't make me do any more.
Okay. The last 3 bits that I've got here, send by email. It was some good advice that I got from Natural England, some a thing from the Town and Country Planning Association, which I thought was very interesting. And then finally something about Preston, which I also thought was very interesting, about sort of procurement. So I can share that with you. So if we could go to that form of words where we go into the private session.
Yes, okay. So yes, at the beginning of the meeting, we did say we would hold a private session at the end of the meeting due to, on the grounds that in view of the nature of the business to be transacted, if the public were present, there would be a disclosure to them of exempt information within the meaning of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act. Basically meaning that what we're going to discuss is commercially sensitive.
Okay.